Imagine being put on trial and sentenced to death for asking too many questions. That's exactly what happened to one of history's greatest minds, a man who never wrote a single book, never claimed to be wise, and spent his days wandering the streets of ancient Athens, annoying people with endless questions. Yet 2,400 years later, this man's name is still known worldwide. This is the story of Socrates, the philosopher who chose death over silence and whose questions would change the world forever. Picture Athens in 399 BCE. The streets are buzzing with merchants hawking their wares, politicians making grand speeches, and young men eager to learn the art of argument. Among them walks a barefoot man with bulging eyes and a thick beard. He doesn't look special. In fact, he's rather ugly. Even his friends admit it. But when he opens his mouth, everything changes. Before we dive into Socrates' story, let's understand the world he lived in. Athens was experiencing its golden age. This was the birthplace of democracy, where citizens gathered in the agora to debate and vote on everything from taxes to war. The Parthenon stood gleaming on the Acropolis, a testament to Athenian power and wealth. Theater flourished, with playwrights like Sophocles and Aristophanes drawing huge crowds. Philosophy was being born in the streets and markets, but beneath this golden surface, trouble was brewing. The recent defeat in the Peloponnesian War had left Athens humbled and bitter. The once mighty empire was shrinking. Democracy itself was under attack. The city had already experienced 2 oligarchic coups, and walking through these troubled streets was a man who would shake the very foundations of society. Socrates wasn't born into privilege. His father was a stonemason, his mother a midwife. As a young man, he served in the Athenian army, fighting bravely in several battles. Soldiers who served with him spoke of his extraordinary endurance. He could stand motionless in thought for hours, even during freezing nights. But Socrates' true calling emerged when he heard about a curious prophecy. The oracle at Delphi had declared that no one was wiser than Socrates. This puzzled him greatly. "I know that I know nothing," he would often say. These famous words capture the heart of his approach to wisdom. While others claimed to have all the answers, Socrates admitted his ignorance. But don't let this fool you. His humility was a weapon, and he was about to turn Athens upside down. Socrates developed a simple but devastating method of questioning that would later be named after him. He'd approach people who claimed to be experts, politicians, teachers, religious leaders, and ask them seemingly simple questions. What is justice? What is courage? What makes a good leader? But with each answer, his questions would get deeper, trickier. Soon, these so-called experts would trip over their own words, revealing they didn't really understand what they claimed to know. Let's look at how this worked in practice. Imagine you're a respected general, known for your bravery. Socrates approaches and asks, "What is courage?" You might answer, "Courage is standing your ground in battle." Seems reasonable, right? But then Socrates asks, "Is a soldier who retreats to gain tactical advantage not courageous? Is someone who stands their ground foolishly truly brave? Would you say a child who stands up to a bully is showing the same kind of courage as a soldier in battle?" With each question, your definition falls apart. This method, known as the Socratic method, is still used today in law schools and universities worldwide. It teaches critical thinking by exposing the flaws in our assumptions. But in ancient Athens, it made Socrates both famous and infamous. The young men of Athens were captivated by Socrates. Imagine watching the most powerful people in your city get publicly embarrassed by a shabby-looking guy asking basic questions. Some youth even started copying his method, much to the annoyance of their elders. Among his students were some of Athens' brightest minds, including Plato, who would go on to found his own school and write down Socrates' teachings. But not all his students used his teachings wisely. Critias became a brutal dictator in the oligarchic coup of 404 BCE. Alcibiades, another brilliant student, betrayed Athens to Sparta during the Peloponnesian War. These actions would later be used against Socrates in his trial. Athens was looking for someone to blame for its troubles. The democracy was fragile after 2 oligarchic coups. The empire was crumbling. Traditional values seemed under attack. And there was Socrates, questioning everything. making the powerful look foolish and attracting young followers. The charges against him were strange but serious, corrupting the youth and not believing in the city's gods, but the real crime, making people question themselves and their deeply held beliefs. The trial was a sham. The jury, made up of 500 citizens, was hostile. The outcome was predetermined. During his trial, Socrates could have easily saved himself. Custom allowed defendants to propose their own punishment, usually exile or a fine. Instead, Socrates suggested that the city should reward him with free meals for life, as was done for Olympic champions. This obviously didn't go over well. Even after being sentenced to death, Socrates had options. His wealthy friend Crito had arranged everything for an escape. Many expected him to flee. After all, the charges were clearly political. But Socrates chose to stay and face death. Why? This is where his true genius shows. He believed that breaking the law, even an unjust one, would destroy the foundation of society. The unexamined life is not worth living, he said, and he lived by these words until the end. In his final days, Socrates turned his own death into one last lesson. While his friends wept, he calmly discussed philosophy. When handed the cup of poisonous hemlock, his hands didn't shake. According to Plato's account, he drank it as if it were wine at a dinner party. His last words were both profound and surprisingly practical. He reminded a friend to repay a debt a sacrificial rooster owed to the god of healing, Asclepius. But here's what makes Socrates truly remarkable. His questions are more relevant today than ever. In an age of social media echo chambers, fake news, and alternative facts, his method of questioning everything is a tool we desperately need. Think about it. When was the last time you really examined your beliefs? How many of your opinions have you inherited without question? What if we all took a page from Socrates' book and started asking more questions? Not to win arguments, but to find truth. The death of Socrates sent shockwaves through Athens. The city that prided itself on freedom and democracy had killed its greatest thinker. But death didn't silence Socrates, it amplified his voice. His student Plato would go on to become one of history's most influential philosophers, spreading Socrates' ideas throughout the ancient world. These ideas would shape all of Western thought. The questions Socrates asked about justice, truth, knowledge, and good governance are still debated today. His method of questioning has influenced fields far beyond philosophy. Modern education, legal systems, scientific inquiry, and even psychotherapy owe a debt to the Socratic method. Every time we question our assumptions or seek deeper understanding through careful questioning, we're following in his footsteps. The death of Socrates poses a question that still haunts us. What's more dangerous, questioning everything or questioning nothing? Athens chose to silence the questioner, but in doing so made his voice immortal. And that leads us to an unsettling thought. Was Socrates right? Did Athens prove his point by killing him? After all, if your beliefs can't survive questioning, maybe they're not worth holding on to. But then again, could any society survive if everyone questioned everything all the time? As you ponder these questions, remember, Socrates never claimed to have the answers. He just knew how to ask the right questions, and maybe in a world drowning in information but starving for wisdom, that's exactly what we need to learn.